Hello, people. I'm back again. Doing something a little differently this week. This week is going to be from an audiobook. I don't think I've done an audiobook on this channel yet. I say this channel like I have another one, which I do not. But I have a weird way of remembering a book, right? So I know what happens. It's the recall on it, where like if I were taking a test, right? I would ace the test. But I sometimes I need the visual cue of seeing a character's name to remember such and such, or the prompt. Otherwise, it just sort of sits in my memory until something related to it happens, and then it, sort of gets pulled out of ye old memory banks. So, I wasn't sure how I would do on an audiobook. Now, I've started listening to a lot of them. Some much longer than others, which isn't a bad thing. But I didn't want to try on some of the long ones because I liked things as it went, but then I would forget, right, what those things were that I liked in the moment, if you get what I'm saying. Whereas if it's a normal book, I can flip through the pages and re-remember, take all my notes, and then be all right. But I can't do that with an audiobook. So I tried it on a shorter one to sort of see how it goes, and I'm thinking of other ways. I think what I'm going to do is hold on. All right, sorry about that. What was I saying? All right, I think what I'm going to do is because I listen on the iPad here, and it has the old technologies. I think I'm going to listen to the book. I'm going to try it with another book here. I'm not saying it's the next book, but another book where I'm going to listen and then sort of voice record my notes as I go, and that'll serve as my written down notes. Then I'll go back and review those notes and see how well I think I remembered a longer book. All right, just so y'all know. Any case, today's book is Star Trek Sarek. I picked it. I just like Star Trek. And that sort of brings me to my first, I guess, issue with the book. And then, is it an issue? Right? Because to me, it's a 5 out of 5 book. It's absolutely wonderful. I love it. But then I started thinking, like, is it a 5 out of 5? What if I give it to someone? Because the writing itself isn't complicated. The issues that it presents are there to be seen. So there's nothing outlandish to it. But then I'm like, would someone who doesn't read like the book? Like, yeah, they could read through it fine. Would someone who doesn't like Star Trek like this book? And then I was like, well, what if you don't know Star Trek at all? So I suppose if you don't like Star Trek, you won't like this book because it's very much Star Trekky, right? Is that cheating though? Right? Because I really do like Star Trek and I know all the characters. So as a book, it doesn't have to fill in as many gaps, right? So I tried now to rethink what I was reading, listening to, with the mindset of someone who doesn't know what all this stuff is. Did it give me enough? I think that it does, right? Because hold on. Ugh, 2 stops in one video. What am I doing? What was I saying? Oh, right. I was trying to think if I come to this straight. I don't know anything about Star Trek. I've never watched an episode. Am I getting a clear enough picture of who Spock is? Right? And in some sense, I'm not getting the visual. But in another sense, I think even if you came straight, where you don't know anything about it, You get the essence of these characters, and the essence is what's important. You're not going to read this book as your introduction to Star Trek. Be interested, go watch an episode, and then just be completely upended. You're not going to feel. Because even, what is it, the early episodes don't have a lot of CG. It was in the 60s. But the book doesn't go with heavy CG, if that makes sense. A book can be describing very outlandish things that would require a lot of production value, so to speak. Whereas this one, it stays right in that pocket. So I think, even taking into account my extreme bias towards the subject matter, I would say it's a strong 4 out of 5. I can't say 5 out of 5. I don't think. Well, no, not a 5 out of 5. There's not enough meat on the bone. There's not enough meat on the bone for a 5 out of 5. And it's nothing against it, because it is what it needs to be. But then I was also thinking, sort of, where did this book come from? What is it? Why is it here? And in that sense, it is here for Star Trek fans. So am I judging it too harshly to try and set it apart from those fans? Maybe I am. It's not like it was written on its own and then the TV show came. It was clearly after, I think it was after the movie came out. Maybe way after. Yeah, it was. I read a synopsis somewhere where the author met the actor who plays Sarek. They discussed ideas, and he's like, well, you should write something up just for this character. So it does come from way after. So maybe it was unfair to even rate it as it was against how it was intended. Maybe not. I think if you come in straight, if you want to hold this up as its own, without any benefits from Star Trek, I would say it's a solid 4 out of 5. If you add the Star Trek element, where we all know what Star Trek is, let's say it got us into liking science fiction books or whatever, I think it's a 5 out of 5. I think if you are specifically averse to Star Trek itself, then you can't read this, because it's 100% Star Trek. I think that's where it sits. I think if you're a general science fiction fan, you would 100% love this. Yeah, 5 out of 5. I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with this, other than the other caveats I just put. Because even if you're into romance, it can sort of feed it feeds you a little bit. All right, but what let me get into what actually happened in this book. I think we start with the news on the Enterprise, a spaceship, in case you don't know, that Spock's mother's dying. So he has to go back to Vulcan? I think they're on the planet Vulcan. Go back to the planet Vulcan because she's going to be there to die. And he's meeting back up with his father. And they've had issues. There's a history here. A bit of a clashing. We then, I think it cuts, or maybe it started in a reverse order. In any case, we have like a past scene. We have a past scene where Sarek is a young diplomat dealing with the Freelands. Freelands being a mysterious race. No one knows what they look like. And he's going through something called Ponfar, which is where, I guess puberty-ish hits once every 7 years for a Vulcan, and they just sort of like really have to mate. This kind of thing. It's all into their culture of, this is what I like about Vulcans, where they're such in control of their emotions. They have committed themselves so much to logic but then every so often the body sort of rails against that. I like that contrast. And it's interesting for them because it's they don't like to share this knowledge, right? It's they like to handle it themselves because they're logic based and it's 100% anti-logic, but they can't control it. These chemicals. I like that juxtaposition. In any case, he finds out in that state that the Freelands may not just be these weird aliens. They look like Vulcans. But he was never sure. He's never sure because of Pon farr. Maybe it was just making him loopy. Cut to now, and the Enterprise crew brings sort of suspicions, right? Suspicions start to come up about this. And he talks to the crew. And they come to realize that it's some sort of a plot, a Romulan plot. Now, I love this interaction as well, where somewhere deep, I've never read a book on this, I've just sort of seen it, and they mention it some here, where back in the history, the Vulcans and Romulans were one race, and that one decided to go all logic, Vulcans, and the others did not. So they went off on their own. And they're like brothers in a weird way. And one thinks one way and the other thinks the other. But they're both very smart, very powerful, have issues. But I like how that plays out. Because here, the whole thing ends up being this just extremely convoluted Romulan plot. I like how they just have plots. They just are underhanded and sneaky, but still strong in a fight and very smart, but emotional. Because what they did is, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, whatever mess this is, they kidnapped a bunch of Vulcans, made them reproduce, then took the kids and raised them as Romulans. Then made them pretend to be Freelands so they could get admittance into the Federation. Then as they're able to walk around in the Federation, they could use their Romulan mental abilities to convince various people in the Federation to go against things that would help the Federation. And in this, they want to convince the Klingons to upend the Khitomer Accord and restart a war with the Federation by killing James Tiberius Kirk. And I'm like, it's so gloriously convoluted. Like, why would you, of all the kind of ways you could start, to pick this such intricateness that it builds and builds and builds, it's so Romulan. Like, why? Why do it this way? And when it fails, they're like, it failed. I'm not gonna be too mad about it. I'll start another one. It's one of many I got going. Like, why though? Why can't you just be nice? And they're just like, I just can't. I absolutely love it. Sarek gets called out on a diplomatic mission. The mom, Spock's mom, Sarek's wife Amanda, wants him to stay because she's dying. And he's like, it's illogical. I can't do anything for you anyway. And this sort of upsets her and Spock, like, a lot. But he goes. And I like how we end up using some of the past, right? Where Sarek's reading a journal and some Spock memories, things like this, to fill out backstory on these two characters' interactions. And it's given me things from when Spock's a youth, sort of how they bring up Vulcans, the issues he had with his father when he wanted to join Starfleet. These little things, right? It's not, nothing about this is end of the world stuff. But they're very personal issues, and the author walks us through them, right? Those become our battle of such and such, right? You don't always have to have this big explosion. Interpersonal issues can be just as interesting if they're fed out to the reader well enough. And this author does a great job. An A.C. Crispin. Respect to you. Because it really does. Now again, these things may sound boring right now as I'm saying them to you. I'm giving you a sense of what's in the book. So you don't go in thinking, like if you say, maybe if you're young and the first Star Trek you've seen is the movies, and you think maybe it's more action packed than it is, sometimes Star Trek isn't that. This is sort of old school Star Trek. But you can, even as a reader, you appreciate, I do at least, appreciate moving through these sorts of things, having them described to me, because I don't have a highly emotional life. I don't get in arguments with people. I don't have grudges, right? So this is a way for me to sort of live through grudges the same as I'd live through traveling through some fantastical elf land or something to this effect, right? It all sort of scratches the same itch. I like all these different places. I like being in space. I like being in Gondor. I like being in the realm of the elves. You know, it's the same. It's just Vulcan culture. That the planet's hot. I'm just sitting here thinking, like, why would you pick a hot planet? I don't know. I don't know why they picked the planet they picked, but it's interesting to think about. Now, as part of this overly complicated plot by the Romulans, they trick a Klingon. In the movies, now it catches you up well enough, but I'm going to just describe it. In the movies, a Klingon tries to kill James Tiberius Kirk. And he ends up killing that Klingon because it was him or me, right? Well, they used this, and then that's what happened. But the politics of it turns it into James T. Kirk just killed a man in cold blood. He just killed the Klingon in cold blood. No honor. So now I have this faction of Klingons who want to break from the Kittimer peace accords, concoct this war. That's because of the Romulan plot. The Vulcan sort of stoked this anger in the Klingon, who's high enough to make a rebel faction. So he makes that rebel faction. They then kidnap, what's this kid's name? Peter Kirk. This is James T. Kirk's cousin, who's a cadet. He's coming up in Starfleet. And they're going to use him as bait to bring Kirk to then kill Kirk. That's all the Klingons want. They don't care about or know about a higher plot. And then in this, they introduce a, what's her name? What is this? Vladir. A lady Klingon. And she's going to some ritualistic killing of Peter Kirk after this is all done. That's what they're going to do. Then, again, the book takes its time, for as short as it is. It really does take its time. And we're fleshing out culture in the Klingons. Her dad is the one who Kirk killed. So she went from having a well-respected house to no house at all because her father died. She's then adopted by another person. So she's now in his house. I love the house element in Klingons. Your honor, you build honor for your house. It moves you up. And then when you do something dumb and it looks bad on the whole house, there are these cultural elements that, what do we say? It doesn't force it. It reinforces the Klingon culture within itself, which is very realistic in a way. If you went back sort of in Japanese history, it's kind of like this, where you brought shame on all of us, and now we all suffer because of what so it's harder to break the rules, the cultural rules, knowing it's not just you, it's you, your mom, your grandma, your kids, and their kids. That it would take a long time. You'd have to restart at the bottom. And it reinforces this nature within a people. The British sort of did the same, Not as to an extreme of, not to the extreme of the Japanese, but if you were the House of Reading or whatever the crap, and one of them does something dumb, the kids and grandkids remember it. There's a social shame that comes from not doing your job well, which in a weird way made it so that when they were only picking the aristocratic class to run the country, it sort of ran well in a weird way. Just a thing. Anyway, I like in this book all of the Klingon culture they show me. Loves me some Klingons. All day, every day. Oops. Twice on Sunday, I love a Klingon. In any case, Peter is smart and fights hard, and he, almost escapes on his own, but then is recaptured. And the Lady Klingon starts to like him, and he starts to like her. Budding romance right in the middle of our book. It doesn't go overboard in case you don't like too much romance, but it does go there if you do like a romance. So there's nothing wrong with it. Works for me. Another thing I like about this book is, yes, it's Star Trek. We have James T. Kirk, Dr. McCoy, Spock. But we don't have the other crew. They don't show up as much, if at all, that I can remember. But even those two, McCoy and Spock, as popular as they are, our author doesn't let them take over the story, right? I'm not trying to shoehorn them in a weird way. Everything's very natural. We follow Peter Kirk more than James T. Kirk. I really like when they can keep the levels appropriate. Vladir. She shows us a lot of Klingon culture where, again, like I was saying about the houses. Well, now she has a new head of her house, and it's, her duty to honor his wishes. And his wishes are that she gets married to strengthen his house, on and on we go, right? Where you marry off one of the daughters. She doesn't want to. She doesn't like the Klingon that she has to marry, but she's going to, at least before she meets Peter. Again, it adds depth to their love story because she's giving up so much for him. Very, very romantic. But I like the idea that she knows in her head, if she were bigger, if she could fight better, she'd just become a warrior. And the Klingons would allow that. But she knows she's too small. She says, I'm too small. I won't win the fight. He'll win out. And because he wins, I have to submit. And because I have to submit, I might as well have to be his wife. I like that concept with, the window into their culture. Not the forced marriage concept. But if, that's their culture. I like seeing those glimpses. In the course of their rescue, because we all know James T. Kirk's going to rescue his cousin, his young cousin, the girl gets stabbed in the stomach. Klingons like to take a vicious wound. It sounds vicious, but they take damage really well. They have two hearts, separate stomachs or something like this. They could take poisons better than most. They're really hardy. It's really cool. In any case, she gets stabbed. Then Peter challenges that Klingon, and he duels him to beat him, but then doesn't kill him, so he has to live with shame, which is worse than death. But then we cut to sort of McCoy dealing with this girl who's been stabbed. Somewhere in the recent past, I think in the same situation where Kirk had to fight that guy, there's another Klingon, an ambassador, a high-end one, who dies under his care. And the writer makes a point to fill us in that it was his lack of knowledge that got the patient killed. That he's never had that. You've had patients that they're too far gone. Whatever wound wouldn't heal. It just didn't work out. But he makes a specific point to say, or she does, that this happened because McCoy knows it was his lack of Klingon knowledge that got a patient killed. And I'm thinking, like, one, that's a lot to keep up with as a future doctor. I don't know how many races are in the Federation, but to constantly have to study their internal makeup and stay, on top of who all's a known race and what all ailments can affect them and on what all ways to fix them. That's a lot for a doctor to keep up with. Whole lot. But that he then takes this, and since then to now, he's been studying Klingons. He's like, I'm not going to let this happen again. And then here it is in his face, a test sort of in his mind for that knowledge. And it's not just the pressure of can you save her, doctor, right? But once you realize he's bringing some more to it, it adds depth to the whole encounter. And this is some of the fun of Star Trek itself. Their personalities come to life, their issues, their qualms about things get brought into sort of generic situations. So him trying to save her is 2 or 3 different stories swirling at once. It's very well done. Of course, he ends up saving her. We go to break up the plot, where we catch up with one of these Romulan ships. Sarek and Spock beam over. Sarek knows who it is, and he ends up in a back and forth, and he challenges him to a specific type of fight, a duel. And it's a duel from their past history, a shared history. Not theirs, Vulcans and Romulans, way back in the past. And they end up fighting with Zanapa. It's a type of knife with the poison on it, and each time you get sort of cut, if the stab doesn't get you, the poison will start to slow you down, aka making the next one's easier. If you get sort of cut 3 times, you're probably going to die. And I like looking at the shared history of these two cultures. I also like the idea of this duel, like a Vulcan duel. Like, what does a logic duel look like? And that's it. It's super clean. We're not really punching each other. It's going to get done quick. You can survive a knife cut, but not with poison on it. So very efficient. He gets stabbed first. He's starting to get slowed down, but using logic, he baits the guy into a setup and gets him good. The guy's like, no, let me die, a Romulan, and they end up saving him too. McCoy saves both of them, all of them. But then that guy, he's going to go face the Piper. He understands he's a Vulcan. He understands that if he goes back, he's probably going to be tried as a traitor because he agreed to this weird duel instead of taking his advantage. But he does it anyway, and it ties up our sort of story a nice way. Spock's mad at him because he doesn't stay with the mom and he goes for duty. Then Sarek's mad at the other guy for choosing duty over logic and a friendship. And then they all sort of come to understand, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And it bow ties our story really well. It's a very well written book. We sort of have an epilogue, which I listen to because I like Star Trek. I normally don't, but I'll listen to this one. I think Peter takes the old Kobayashi Maru. The unwinnable test. Obviously, he wins. He's a Kirk. That's what they say. But then he decides, I'm not going to go into command. I'm going to go into diplomacy. And I like this element too. Because rather than they just fall in love happily ever after, we're shown how they have lives to live and they have to integrate this love into their lives. They have to go to their schools. They're separated by distance. They will be, separated by work at times. That they have to work at. It's not enough that you love them. You have to work at it. And that they are going to. I like that idea that it shows us that. And then sort of that's how the book ends. I think it's wonderful. All right. I think that's long enough. I can't tell for sure because I, had to pause it so many times. Ads? Ads. Okay. I think I used a credit because I have the little Audible app thing. It's not an ad. I don't have Audible as a sponsor. I buy that crap. And I used it. I used one of those credits. Yeah? No, did I? I got it some kind of way. In any case, it's not that long. It's a great read. I forgot to add this. All right, I'm going to add this. I should have added it earlier. The narrator's great. It's an audiobook. I should sort of talk about the audiobookness, right? The narrator's great. Well, I'm gonna cut out of the ad. We back. I forgot something. The narrator's great. The speaker, the person who's reading, he does voices of each of them, but not overboard. It also has some small moments of sound effects. Not too many, but just a few. It makes it very immersive. So as an audiobook, I liked it as well. All right, back to your regularly scheduled ads. All right. Okay, I don't think I forgot anything. Thank you for sitting this long. I'll probably do more audiobooks. Talk to you all. Talk to you lovely lot next week.